Hello, hello, hello. This is Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes, and I am proud to bring you the word from SDB coming to you from my kitchen once again. So, I am sitting here at my kitchen table. I'm actually kind of procrastinating. I need to finish up a project tonight that's kind of due at midnight. But my muse is tripping. She don't want to cooperate. So I've needed to do my broadcast. So I said, well, I'm going to take a break and actually still be productive, even though I'm not working on what I really need to be working on. I am going to take a moment and do the word from SDB. Last night, I introduced part one of the five-part series. Mean girls grow up to be mean women and mean CEOs in honor of October being Domestic Violence Month and National Bullying Month. This is the last day of October, so I did get it in or get it started during the month that is dedicated to those two topics. But it is always rather a good time to discuss this issue because it's very important for how we interact with each other in the workplace and the marketplace. And so I am glad to bring some light to an issue that we need to discuss, and that is the fact that bullies don't stop bullying when they graduate from high school. They show up in the workplace, they show up in the marketplace, and we have to learn how to deal with them and the real life implications of when they do show up in the workplace. So I'm glad to bring you the word from SDB. And again, this is part two of the five-part series. Mean girls grow up to be mean women and mean CEOs. And yesterday I introduced the concept of how bullying shows up in the workplace. And over the course of the next four series, including tonight, I will discuss a different aspect of that. Tonight, on day two, I want to talk about the queen bee bully because this is a phenomenon that has actually been studied, and it studies the fact or how women bullies show up in the workplace and some of the really real life implications that they have on perpetuating gender discrimination and perpetuating gender bias against women leaders. And it's very ironic that queen bee bullies tend to be both a product and a proliferation of gender discrimination in the same token. So it is something that we need to be aware of because they show up in social organizations, they show up in businesses, they show up in the workplace, and they show up in different industries. And it's really important to recognize either the queen bee you work with or the queen bee that you are. Because the queen bee concept, of course, emanates from the real queen bee who rules the honeybee hive, right? And but it's not good to be a queen bee as a human. And the queen bee syndrome basically studies women who tend to be overly aggressive but not in a I'm trying to do more things with my career. I'm trying to be aggressive in expanding my territory, aggressive in improving things, but tend to take on masculinized behaviors to the detriment of other women. And typically, this is one of the ways that mean girls show up as mean women, mean CEOs in the workplace. And even though they are women, obviously, they tend to disassociate themselves from women as a group. And one of the things, that I've studied, and there are lots of studies on, is the influence of social groups. And the thing is, in the workplace, in the marketplace, in the community, in every aspect of life, we are comprised of different social groups, and women are a social group. And queen bees tend to disassociate from women, and they instead of embracing the power that comes from working as a collective, working as a social group, they disassociate themselves from women and tend to take on the attitudes, the actions, the behaviors of the good old boys, or the boys club, or want to be seen as one of the boys. And here's the interesting phenomenon about that is, um, we're not one of the boys. We're never going to be one of the boys. Why do we want to fit in when there are certain advantages to us embracing our authentic selves and being who we are and showing up in the workplace and bringing those attributes that are natural to us? Because diversity, the concept of diversity takes on a lot of different meanings, and of course it can boil down to ethnicity. But at its heart, diversity simply means bringing different perspectives, and women bring a different perspective to the marketplace, to the workplace, to the conversation, because we see things differently than men. And there's not a benefit to society when we say, okay, we're going to disassociate ourselves with who we are as women, and now we're going to be like men. We need to be like who we are and be authentic in those things that make us natural leaders, those things that are natural leadership attributes about us, and we refine that and make it work for us in the workplace. But getting back to queen bees, who are queen bees? These are typically women who have achieved either success in their careers or success in their fields, and rather than, again, building up the power of the social group, they tend to dismantle it, or they disassociate from it, and they can actively work against women. So queen bees show up in one of two ways, where they are purposefully detached from bringing up other women along the way, or they are purposefully acting in the interest of preventing other women from succeeding. So they actively work against other women. And I talk about this from the perspective of social groups, and the fact that we are more powerful when we build up social capital, and it works against us when we don't build up that social capital by empowering each other. Because the reality is, in the workplace, in the marketplace, you're only going to get what's meant for you. So there's really it's really antithetical to think that by helping another woman to succeed, that I'm somehow going to take away from me. Because if I'm really smart about it, what I recognize is that if I build an alliance with another woman, then I'm more powerful than I am by myself. And so that's something that we really have to embrace from a social group perspective. But I also want to focus on it from a anti-bullying perspective. And one of the things that we don't fully appreciate is, as I mentioned in the last segment, bullies tend to be people who are hurting, right? These are people who are destroying relationships for the point of building relationships. It's quite an ironic approach to building relationships, but that's at the truth of the heart of kind of how bullies operate. They capitalize on social and relational aggression. Well, queen bees are acting out in the same way, where they've been hurt, so to speak, from discrimination in the workplace. And so rather than dismantling this system of discrimination and building up alliances with other women so that they are not facing these issues by themselves, then they internalize the discrimination against them and then begin to project that onto others. And so it's a really interesting phenomenon in the workplace and the marketplace, where you see this proliferation of discrimination, gender discrimination by women. It would seem that it would always come from men, but it doesn't. Women are bigger sometimes proponents of gender discrimination than men are, because we subscribe to certain beliefs about our roles as leaders, and rather than challenging societal norms that say women must be in this place and you can't go in this, and you can't lead in this way and you must lead in that way, we internalize a lot of those things, and then we begin to project that on our peers. We project that on our leaders. And so oftentimes what you will see is, women criticizing strong women leaders. So when a woman does show up and lead in an assertive fashion, because that's what's required in the situation, or she's decisive, or she's direct, or she is otherwise aggressive in her leadership style, then many times women do not respond to that positively because it challenges the societal norms about how women are supposed to lead. But again, getting back to the queen bee, she operates in that format in an aggravated form of aggression, where it is indeed actively working against other women rather than building them up. So, it creates this rivalry in the workplace that tends to work not only against the women involved, but women in general. Because when we are observed by our peers, our male peers, and even our female peers as being unable to get along in the workplace, where you see that, okay, well, when a woman does attain a leadership position, this is how she leads in this negative way, then it creates this negative perception that, well, we don't want to have that to be recreated with others, so other women don't get the opportunity to succeed. So not only does the queen bee achieve their success by derogating other women, but they prevent other women from getting those opportunities because they create this negative perception that doesn't really support the promotion of women to leadership positions. So, when we do get to leadership positions, we have a responsibility not only to be great leaders, but to build up other leaders. And that's one of the fallacies that I don't quite understand, particularly among women, when we believe that, or when we don't embrace the fact that, again, we're more powerful when we are aligned than when we are acting by ourselves. I mean, this is something that's, you can look to so many different analogies that illustrate the importance of having an alliance. When you're out there by yourself, you're out there by yourself. So when you build up others, you can just think of it from a purely selfish perspective. Well, I'm going to build this woman up so that she can be an asset to me, and then I can grow. So if you want to look at it from that perspective, look at it from that perspective. The end result is the same. But really, we ought to be looking at, how can we build each other up so that we can become more powerful individually and collectively. And again, I don't want to give the impression that this is some kind of battle of the sexes. It's not about that. It's just about tapping into the power of connections and making sure that no talent is left on the shelf. Because when women don't bring other women along with them, it is not only hurting that relationship or hurting that particular woman, it's hurting the organization, it's hurting the marketplace, it's hurting the industry, because you're leaving untapped talent on the shelf. And that's something that just seems so illogical about any type of discriminatory behavior, where you're discriminating against someone who can potentially add value that's ultimately going to help you. So when women don't support other women, and particularly when they actively bully other women, it works against the organization as a whole and should not be supported. So I want to close out with just saying, what do you do when you encounter a queen bee? What do you do when you are dealing with a woman leader who is actively working against you personally, or actively working against other women? How do you combat that? How do you eliminate that influence? Well, you can't, and it depends on the relative power that you have. So I want to talk about it from two perspectives. One, when it's your peer, and one, when it is someone who is of greater authority than you in the organization or in the industry or in the situation. When you are recognizing it among your peers, it's important for you to call it out and And you don't have to do it publicly, but it is something that you need to bring self-awareness to, because sometimes queen bees are bullying and don't even recognize it. They don't have not necessarily been enlightened on the difference between great leadership and dictatorship, because there's a huge difference. And many people think that leading is just barking orders, and it's a lot more than that. And on I think session 3, nope, 4, when I get to part 4 of this series, I'm going to share a little bit about my personal experiences and how I had to kind of overcome the misperception that being in authority meant being authoritative. A big difference in how you are able to actually to influence, and you influence more, or you are able to exhibit a greater influence when you build relationships as opposed to when you destroy relationships, which is again the big irony of bullies. Bullies are really trying to build relationships, but they do it in a very destructive way by tearing down other relationships. But bringing about that self-awareness is really quite important when you're dealing with a peer. And then you can't force a peer to do something because you may lack the direct authority to do so, but you always have the influence. And so just because you see them do it, then you might need to mirror it, not to mirror it, but to model behavior that is counter to what you are observing them doing. And then the third thing is to use the influence that you do have to mend relationships and to encourage that positive interaction among your peers, because bullies always need an audience. And you saw it on the playground, because all of us have experienced a bully at some point. We have seen it, or we have experienced it personally, and they always need an audience. And one of my favorite takedowns of a bully is in The Christmas Story, when Ralphie gets mad, and I forget the boy with the braces, but Ralphie gets mad. If you've ever seen The Christmas Story, Ralphie gets mad. The boy with the braces, I think, breaks his glasses, but he just goes like completely off and just beats the dog poo out of him in front of everybody on the playground. And then after that, he doesn't have any more issues with the bully. And we have to figure out, and I am not a proponent of saying you go to work tomorrow and beat the dog poo out of somebody. No, what I'm saying is we have to figure out what is the equivalent of that. And really the equivalent is taking away the public audience, because when bullies don't have a public audience, then they tend to not perform. And so what we've got to stop doing as peers is giving them the audience. And that's something that's really important. So if you are in the position of being bullied by a queen bee, you are encountering a woman who is actively working against you. And again, bullies, I'm talking about this in the context of queen bees, which are women, but men are bullies too. So, but of course, we're putting this in the context of women bullies. But when you do encounter it, it is a little bit more difficult. Let's just be honest. It's a little bit more difficult to address it when it's somebody you report to, it's a client, or it's a major influencer in your industry. It's when you don't have the leverage of the other person, or when the power balance is not in your favor, it is more difficult to deal with it. And here's the thing that I want you to recognize is that you always have a choice, right? If you're being bullied by someone in the workplace, the thing that you have to remember is that you always have a choice, okay? You have a choice to withstand it, or you have a choice to advocate against it, and you have a choice to remove yourself from the situation. Those are basically your 3 choices, but those are 3 choices that you always have. Now, if I do not recommend withstanding it, because no one deserves to be in that toxic environment where you're trying to make your living, you're trying to grow your business, you're trying to do well on your job, and you're having to do it in a negative environment. So it's always important to enlist the help of the bully's peer. Okay, you may not be in the same power structure as or power level as the bully, but there is always someone who is either bigger than the bully or at least the same size. And so, again, it's all about building alliances. So you go to someone who is the bully's peer or the bully's authority, supervisor, or someone who has greater influence or greater power structure than they do. And it's not about going to tell on them, and it's not about going to make it a personal issue, but it's always important to describe the effect of the bully in terms of the negative effect on somebody else. It's because it costs companies money, it costs business, it costs transactional time, because it interferes with the ability to get work done. And so describing it in that way and then getting their advice. Sometimes it may be that they can give you direction on how to deal with that person directly. Sometimes it may be that they have the ability and are willing to go and talk to that person on your behalf. But that's the first step, is to gain an alliance. Now, what if you don't have anybody who is the bully's peer? Then, you can kind of do like Ralphie and build an alliance among your peers. Because if it's just happening to one person, I mean, it's just one person. But if it's happening among an entire group, then giving voice to the issue as a collective can give you a greater leverage to be able to deal with it. So either interact with the bully's peer or interact with your peers, and y'all kind of gang up, but not really. Again, I'm not suggesting that you go to work or go to your business or in your industry and gang up on somebody, literally, and fight them. Now, of course, if they're being violent, then you need to protect yourself, but I am not advocating violence. And then the second thing, if you're dealing with a queen bee with whom you have at least a good enough relationship to be able to talk to candidly, have the courage, make the choice to bring it to their attention. Now, of course, it can be a career limiting move, but at some point, as an adult, as a CEO, as a leader in your own right, you have to make decisions about what's important in your life and what's not. And at some point, you've got to make a decision to be an advocate for yourself. Point blank. If you're being bullied by someone in the workplace, at some point you have to make a decision that you are important enough to advocate for yourself. And that may have some economic consequences. I do not say that lightly, and I do not ignore the fact that if you confront a queen bee in the workplace, you can lose your job. But guess what? Like you got that job, you can get another. So, and again, I don't say that nonchalantly, but what I say is you come up with a strategy. You don't ever respond on the defense to a bully. You always have to have a strategy. And the strategy, the most important part of the strategy is your exit strategy. In the event things don't go as planned. So, you have a backup plan. You recognize, what you may need to do in the event that it has an economic consequence, i.e. you get fired, you lose the business, you lose the client, whatever it is, and you make a plan around how do you mitigate that. And then the last choice, of course, is to remove yourself from the situation, because again, no one deserves to work in an environment where you are stressed out, you feel threatened, and you're unable to get your work done, and you're unhappy. But ultimately, the power to deal with a bully, particularly in the workplace and the marketplace, boils down to your decisions, and you have more power than you give yourself credit for, and it's important to recognize that, and it's important to act upon that. So with that, I am going to close out part 2 of the 5-part series, Mean Girls Grow Up to Be Mean Women and Mean CEOs. And I will come back next time in part 3, where we will discuss how the influence that this has, how bullies are portrayed rather in TV, video, and the internet. Because bullies have a pulpit, they have a platform now, and which can make them bolder than they have been in the past when everything they had to do face to face. So we'll talk about that in part 3. So it has been my pleasure to bring you part 2 of a 5-part series. Mean girls grow up to be mean women and mean CEOs. And hopefully you have gotten some useful tools and strategies around, you're welcome, around how to deal with queen bee bullies. And again, the thing to remember is you are empowered by your choices. You always have the choice to advocate for yourself. You have the choice to remove yourself from the situation. And of course, you always have the choice to just tolerate. So tolerate, advocate, or I guess remove yourself. I'm trying to think of something that rhymes in A, but it's too late at night for me to come up with something. But anyway, those are always your 3 choices. And it's always about being strategic and working through the pros and the cons and recognizing that there are going to be consequences, but you can always mitigate the consequences. So just like with anything else, have a strategy, have a plan, and build allies, because it's hard to take down a bully by yourself. And so you need allies, and allies you build among your peers, or you build allies among the bully's peers, and or ideally you build allies among both. But it is something that can be overcome because there's a real cost to the company, there's a real cost to your business, there's a real cost to your life, and so it's something that that you need to deal with head on. So if you ever have some questions about how to deal with a bully in the workplace, and you can of course always add comments. I will certainly answer those, but you can always text me 228-238-7997 and say I need help, and I would be glad to help you work through some tools and strategies to be able to deal with bullies, or if you are indeed the bully yourself. Because the first step to overcoming that is to be aware of bully tendencies and to then begin to recultivate your leadership style in a way where you're able to use your influence rather than using brute force. So this has been the word from SDB, and I am so glad to bring you the part 2 of the 5-part series, Mean Girls Grow Up to Be Mean Women and Mean CEOs. And I look forward to joining you next time for part 3 of the series, where I will be talking about bullies on the TV, the videos, and the internet. So until then, I'm going to finish up my glass of wine and get my project finished so that I can meet my deadlines, meet my deliverable. And but it has been a pleasure bringing you the word from SDB. So until next time, see you later.